Hi, ever seen a pine cone drop from a tree and just explode into a bunch of tiny parachutes? Like, it's not even a slow-mo moment. It's like the forest just got a fashion show. It's like the pine cone's got a secret mission to spread its babies as far away as possible. But now, it's not like it's got a rocket or anything. You think it's just fine? Nope, it's more like the pine cone is a tiny conspiracy theorist waiting for the perfect moment to reveal its secret. So here's the deal. The pinecone's not just opening, it's doing it on purpose. Like, it's got a whole plan, and it's not even trying to be dramatic. And if you're wondering why it's so weirdly fascinating, well, I'm still trying to figure that out. But I'll tell you this, pinecones are basically nature's version of a TikTok trend. So what exactly are we talking about? Well, imagine a tiny, pointy, cone-shaped seed holder that looks like a little forest in your hand. It's not just a weird shape, it's got a secret plan. This isn't just a cone, it's a survival strategy. Think of it like a superhero's armor, except instead of fighting villains, it's fighting for its seeds to grow. So, this cone isn't just sitting there. It's got a whole system for opening up like a tiny, nature-themed parachute. And it's all about timing and wind. It's kind of like a little time capsule. But instead of holding secrets, it's holding seeds waiting for the perfect moment to fly away. So, to recap, this isn't just a cone. It's a clever little machine made of wood, seeds, and a whole bunch of patience. And we're about to see how it opens like a tiny, leafy parachute. So you're like, why does this even matter? Well, imagine if pinecones were your friends. They're basically nature's version of a tiny, woody, waterproof umbrella. And you know what? That's super useful when you're trying to stay dry in the forest. But here's the kicker. They're not just keeping dry, they're also making sure their seeds get spread out. Like a tiny, slow-motion seed rocket ship. You don't want your seeds stuck in one spot, right? And if you think about it, this whole thing is like a planned version of a plan-ahead strategy. They're basically saying, I'm not just sitting here waiting for the wind. I'm building a backup plan for my babies. So yeah, maybe you don't care about pine cones, but if you've ever wondered how things in nature are so smart without talking, then you should care. It's like a secret code written in the forest. And honestly, that's the kind of coolness that makes you go, okay, I'm gonna go plant some trees now. Because if pine cones can do that, why can't we? Okay, so pine cones have been around since the dinosaurs, like way back when trees were basically the only thing in the forest and everyone was super chill with it. They probably started opening to let seeds out, like nature's version of a tiny parachute, so the seeds could float away and not die in a crowd. Over millions of years, they got better at opening, like a slow-motion version of a popcorn kernel, but with more drama and less butter. So yeah, pine cones are basically the original time-lapse artists, doing their thing in slow motion, just trying to survive and spread their seeds. And that's the short version of how pinecones evolved to open like little parachutes, which is basically the most dramatic way to get your seeds out of the forest. So imagine you're a pinecone, and you're basically a really fancy seed with a bad attitude. You're stuck on a tree, and you want to go on a little adventure. But now, well, you're just waiting for the perfect moment to pop open like a tiny parachute. The secret is inside your own body. You've got these tiny little scales that are like little fingers, and when you get wet or cold, they start to curl up. It's like your fingers are doing the splits, and suddenly you're open and ready to fly. But here's the twist. You don't just open up randomly. You're actually responding to the weather. If it's wet, you open up. If it's dry, you stay closed. It's like your body is a weather report, but with more woody texture. And when you finally open, it's not just for show. Those scales are actually helping you float down gently, like a tiny parachute. You're not just opening, you're flying. It's like your body is a flying machine made of wood and patience. So in the end, you're not just a pine cone. You're a tiny, woody, weather-sensitive, parachute-wearing adventurer. And you're doing it all without a single instruction manual. That's the magic of nature. So, first things first, you gotta have a pine cone. Not just any pine cone, though this one needs to be a little bit sad. Like, it's been sitting around for a while, feeling a little bit dusty and maybe a little bit confused about its purpose in life. Now, here's the thing, pine cones are like the emotional support plants of the forest. They're not just sitting there for fun. They've got a job to do, and that job is to spread their seeds. And now, well, that's where the magic begins. Before the big open up, the pinecone is basically a closed-up, slightly annoyed squirrel. It's got these scales that are like tiny, angry eyelashes always ready to flip shut if someone gets too close. But wait, what if it's not just about being angry? Maybe it's all about the weather. Like, the pinecone's got a little radar in its scales, sensing when it's time to open up and let the wind do its thing. So, step 1 is just setting the scene. The pinecone is in the right place, feeling the right vibe, and it's ready for the big moment. No pressure, just a little bit of pinecone magic. Okay, so the pinecone starts to open because the scales get a little nervous. They're like, wait, is it safe to let go of all that tight grip? And then they start to loosen up. The scales are like tiny hands that were holding on super tight, but now they're slowly letting go. It's like when you finally decide to stop holding your phone in your hand and let it fall. As they let go, the scales start to spread out. It's like when you open a book too fast and all the pages fly out. Except these pages are kind of like little wings. The air gets in and pushes the scales apart even more. It's like when you blow on a balloon and it pops, but instead of a loud pop, it's a soft, gentle open. And then boom, the pinecone is open like a tiny umbrella. It's like your friend who always has a snack in their pocket and finally decides to share. Okay? So the pinecone starts to open, but it doesn't just pop open like a flower. It actually twists, like when you twist open a jar, but way more dramatic. The scales twist around each other, kind of like a slinky that's about to fall apart. This twisting is super clever because it uses the shape of the pinecone itself. The scales are like little fingers that grip the center, and when they twist, they push apart. It's like if your fingers were trying to open a jar, but with more bark and less caffeine. The twist also creates a kind of locking effect. The scales stay in place until the right amount of force is applied. It's like if your shoelaces had a mind of their own and decided to untie themselves only when you stepped on a banana peel. And here's the kicker. This twist actually helps the pinecone open more efficiently. It's not just about opening, it's about opening the right way, like a door with a handle that's designed to twist, not pull. So, in the end, the twist isn't just a fancy move. It's a smart, efficient way to open up and let the seeds fly. Just like how you'd never open a jar by pulling straight up, you have to twist. And if you ever try to open a pinecone, remember, it's a tiny, woody, forest-adjacent version of a jar. So, here's the thing. Pinecones don't just open because they're sad. They're actually doing some serious science, like a tiny plant version of a superhero. Inside their scales, there's this weird little structure called a helical twist. It's like a spiral staircase that helps them open up in the right way. When the weather changes, like when it gets wet or cold, that spiral structure starts to twist, and boom, the scales pop open like a tiny, laser-powered spring. This whole process is called hygroscopic movement. Basically, the pinecone uses humidity like a magic trick to make itself open. And that's how pinecones open like tiny parachutes, with a little science, a lot of patience, and a whole lot of natural engineering. So imagine your pinecone is a tiny, stubborn kid who refuses to let go of its seeds until it's absolutely sure the wind is strong enough. It's like a kid holding onto a balloon, waiting for the perfect gust. When the wind finally comes, it's like the kid finally gives up and lets go. The seeds fly out like tiny, giggling fireflies, and the pinecone just sits there, like it's proud of itself. In reality, the pinecone is using the wind to spread its babies, but the kid analogy makes it feel like a funny, dramatic moment in nature's version of a school play. So next time you see a pinecone, imagine it's just trying to be a good parent, but in the most dramatic way possible. It's like a parent who only gives their kids a ride when the weather is just right. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Apple AirPods 2nd generation. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. And honestly, it's kind of adorable. Like a kid with a tiny parachute, waiting for the perfect moment to fly. It's nature's version of a toddler with a kite. So here's the part that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. Pinecones use something called helical torsion to open up. It's like a tiny, planned version of a spiral staircase that only works one way. Imagine if your fingers were connected to your palm with a spring. When the spring tightens, your fingers would pop open. That's basically what happens inside a pinecone. This whole system is super efficient, and it helps the pinecone release its seeds at the perfect time like a plant version of a timed bomb. So even though it sounds like something from a robot movie, it's just a clever way for plants to spread their babies. Nature is wild, and it's also really good at math. And that's the part that sounds made up but isn't. It's real, it's cool, and it's totally worth the brain workout. Next time you see a pinecone, give it a little respect. So here's the first myth I want to bust. Pinecones open because they're trying to escape gravity. They're like, oh no, I'm falling, I need you to pull on my parachute. Oh really? They're just trying to make sure their seeds get a fair shot at life. You know, like giving a baby a head start in the game of survival. It's not a superhero moment, it's more like a smart move. They're not fighting gravity, they're just using it to their advantage. So next time you see a pinecone open, don't think it's trying to escape. Think it's just doing its job, like a tiny CEO of the forest. And that's the first myth busted. Stay curious, stay silly, and remember, nature is the best show, even if it's just a pine cone opening up. So, I thought pine cones open like tiny parachutes because they look like they're about to float away. But no, they don't actually float. They just sort of fall out of trees and open up when they hit the ground. I mean, it's like a sad version of a parachute. You know what's really weird? They open up the same way whether they're on the ground or in the air. So maybe the parachute thing is just a poetic way to describe how they spread their seeds. But no one's really sure how they know when to open. I mean, maybe they're just lazy and open up when they get bored. Like, oh, I've been sitting here all day. I guess I'll open up now. It's not a parachute, it's a nap. But here's the real kicker. Even if they didn't open like parachutes, they still spread their seeds. So maybe the whole parachute thing is just a metaphor for how we want to imagine them. Or maybe it's just a bad joke that got stuck in our heads. So, in conclusion, pine cones don't open like tiny parachutes. They just open like pine cones. But that's okay, because it's more fun to pretend they're tiny parachutes. And I'm not gonna stop you. Pine cones are the only ones with a parachute plan. Your phone's camera has one too. When you tap the screen, it snaps its little shutter like a pine cone snapping open. Ever seen a seed pod on a plant? That's a pine cone's adult version. It's like nature's version of a tiny umbrella, ready to open and let out its seeds. Even your coffee mug has a little parachute plan. When you pour the coffee, it doesn't just spill, it flows like a pine cone opening, slow and controlled. You can't see it, but your car's airbag is like a pine cone's parachute. It's there, waiting to deploy, just like a pine cone waiting for the wind. So next time you see a pine cone, remember, it's not just a weird tree decoration. It's a tiny superhero with a parachute, ready to help its seeds escape and grow into trees. Okay, so imagine this. You're in a forest, and you're like, hey, what's with these pine cones? They're just sitting there like, I'm not falling, I'm just waiting. But then, poof, the pine cone opens up like it's trying to escape a magic trap, and you're like, oh, I get it now. It's like a tiny, determined squirrel trying to get out of a jar. And here's the kicker. It's not just opening, it's doing it in a way that makes the whole forest look like a science fair project. Like, hey, nature, you're winning this one. So next time you see a pine cone, you can just nod and say, yep, that's how you open like a tiny parachute. And then you go get a snack, because that's what we do. Okay, so someone tried to open a pine cone with a sledgehammer, not for science, just for fun. And it worked. Like, really worked. The pine cone didn't just open, it exploded, like a tiny firework. Except it was just a pine cone, and a sledgehammer, and a guy with a weird sense of humor. The record for the hardest pine cone to open is held by a guy who tried to open one with a chainsaw. And it took him 12 minutes. And he cried. So, pine cones are basically nature's way of saying, I'm not a toy, but I can be a bit of a drama queen. Next time you see a pine cone, just remember, it's not trying to open, it's trying to survive. And maybe also to be a little dramatic. Okay, so here's the thing, I guess. Sometimes the pine cone decides to open at the worst possible moment. Like, maybe right when you're trying to grab your snack without dropping it. And then you're like, oh no, not again. Imagine a pine cone that's like, I'm gonna be the hero of this forest. But then it's just a big floppy thing that falls into a puddle. It's like a sad superhero in a puddle, trying to fly. And then it's not just a pine cone. It's a pine cone with a tragic backstory. Like, it tried so hard to open, but now it's just a soggy pile of disappointment. It's the saddest thing ever. So yeah, sometimes nature has a bad day, and sometimes that bad day involves a pine cone falling into a puddle like a broken toy. But hey, at least it's not a pine cone that's also a robot. So in conclusion, pine cones are like, I'm trying my best. But sometimes their best is just a soggy, open mess. But hey, at least they're not sad. They're just pine cone sad. So yeah, pine cones are basically nature's version of a really bad parachute. They open up to float away, but it's like they're trying to do a backflip into the wind. And honestly, I'm not sure if it's a good idea. But here's the catch, pine cones aren't super good at flying. They're more like a leaf with a bad sense of direction. They might drift for a bit, but they're basically doomed to land somewhere weird and dusty. And the worst part, they're not even trying to be stealthy. They're basically yelling, I'm a pine cone. Look at me, I'm falling. It's like a toddler trying to show off in wind tunnel. So yeah, while pine cones are cool and kinda cute, their parachute act is basically a disaster waiting to happen. They're like the internet's version of a meme that's just trying too hard. But hey, if you're a pine cone, you've got to do what you got to do. You're not a rocket scientist, you're a pine cone. And honestly, you're doing better than most of us in this life. So, how did humans even figure out that pine cones open like tiny parachutes? Well, first, someone probably looked at a pine cone and thought, wait, is this thing trying to escape? It's got a face like it's judging me. Then someone probably said, this isn't a random thing, it's got structure. Like, why is it shaped like a spiral? Why does it pop open when you touch it? Is it a secret message from the forest? Or is it just mad at us? And then, a scientist or a curious kid probably did what we all do. Took a pine cone, sat on it, and watched it open like a slow-motion explosion of tiny leaves and frustration. Eventually, they realized that the pine cone's shape and the way it's built is like a built-in spring. It's got a little explosion in its DNA, waiting for the right trigger. So, in the end, humans figured this out by being weird, curious, and maybe a little bit like a pine cone waiting for the perfect moment to open up. Okay, so pine cones open like tiny parachutes, but what if the pine cone is in a hurricane? Like, what if it's literally being tossed around by a giant wind machine? Well, the same rules apply, just more drama. The scales want to open, but the wind is like, nope, not today, buddy. But here's the weird part. Sometimes the wind is so strong, it actually closes the pine cone again. Like, the scales get pushed together so hard, they lock up. So in a hurricane, the pine cone might just stay closed, like it's doing I'm not falling, I'm surviving kind of thing. And if it does fall, it's like a tiny skydiver trying to survive a tornado. That's just a lot. Okay, imagine if we took pine cones and turned them into tiny skydivers. What if we made a bunch of them fall from a plane? They'd open up like a million little paragliders, floating down slowly, like a force getting its own air force. Quick word from our sponsor. If this sounds like something you'd enjoy, take a look at the Kindle Paperwhite e-reader. There's a link and a QR code on screen right now, and in the description below. Alright, back to it. But wait, would they even work? Pine cones are kind of heavy for parachutes. They might just crash into trees, or land in a pile like a bunch of angry squirrels trying to grab snacks. What if we made them super light? Maybe by putting them in a bubble wrap box? Then they could float down like confetti, but with a pine cone twist. Imagine a pine cone snowfall, but with more spiky drama. But here's the catch. Pine cones are kind of stubborn. They don't want to open unless they're in the right conditions. So if you try to force them to fall, they might just stay closed like a grumpy squirrel holding on to its acorn. So, while the idea of pinecone parachutes is fun, it's not exactly practical. But hey, if you're ever in a forest and need a way to slow down a pinecone, maybe just throw it into a lake. It'll open up, and you can enjoy the view of a pinecone doing a slow-motion float. Before you go, if you enjoyed this, please give it a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell us in the comments what you'd like us to make next. We read every single one. Thank you so much for watching.
Comment this emoji if you made it to the end.